Good morning. I'm Andrew Whaley. We continue in our Sabbath series today with a reading from Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Healing on the Sabbath was permitted, but only in matters of life and death. That was the teaching of Jesus' day. And yet, he goes to this man in the synagogue on the Sabbath and heals his withered hand. That was not a matter of life and death. Jesus could have waited the next day, met the man back outside the synagogue, and healed him, and still honored the Sabbath. But he doesn't do that. Why not? It's not because Jesus dishonors or doesn't care about the Sabbath. You heard in the reading how this man is presented. He's a pawn in a game that the Pharisees and the Herodians are playing. He's the bait in a trap. They don't care about this man with his withered hand. They don't care that he's ever restored. They may not even know his name, but they bring him in the synagogue just to see what Jesus will do. They fail to see his humanity at all. So Jesus heals the man first because he refuses to let any human being simply be the bait or the pawn in some power player's game. Second, Jesus does this healing work on the Sabbath because it fulfills the spirit of the Sabbath. Sure, it's not life and death, but isn't Sabbath rest supposed to restore our bodies? It is to bring restoration to our bodies, to allow us to visit with friends and those we love, to rejoice in God's goodness, to observe the beauty and care for the creation. So restoring this man's withered hand on the Sabbath fits the spirit of the Sabbath. Jesus isn't breaking the Sabbath. He's simply honoring it for what it's intended to be, a life-transforming practice, not a set of rules that must be followed in order to gain acceptance. Now we read, right after Jesus does this work, the Pharisees and the Herodians go in together to figure out how can they get rid of Jesus. They want to destroy him. Why? Well, these power players hold their positions because they're able to craft a culture where some people are expendable, forgettable, disposable. The man with a withered hand can just be bait in a trap. He doesn't really matter. If he starts to matter, then our unjust practices and our abuses become exposed because he's not just a cog in our system. And second, if the Sabbath isn't just a way to try to prove our worthiness to God, then people might begin to see how the practice of Sabbath shapes how they treat one another every other day of the week. Their goal is, make sure you're following all the rules of the Sabbath as a way to distract the people from caring about and loving their neighbor. If you can separate the love of God from the love of neighbor, you can get people to focus only on the love of God and ignore their neighbors and allow the unjust systems and practices to persist. But if the honoring of God moves our gaze to care about the honoring of our neighbor, the forgotten ones, the nameless ones, then again, the structures that have promoted them to the top of the empire begin to crumble. Of course, Jesus doesn't give up on this message. He keeps honoring the nameless ones. He keeps reminding his own religious leaders, you cannot separate the love of God from the love of neighbor. If anything you craft that helps you to love God causes you to harm or ignore the suffering of your neighbor, then you're not honoring God, Jesus says. And you know what happens to somebody who does that to the power players of a community? They get hung on a cross. But those who follow Jesus, who believe in his resurrection, his Spirit calls us to the same way of life. Not to see anybody as expendable or disposable or beyond redemption. And never to practice a piety, a love of God that is entirely separate from the love of other people. Our commitment to the transcendent one moves us into physical care for those around us every day. So may we, disciples of Jesus Christ, honor the Sabbath by honoring others and bringing healing wherever we are able.